Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Anne Fernald and I welcome you to the Twice Over podcast, because to teach is to learn twice over. In this episode, Humility and Confidence, we are joined by Karin Coonrod, theater director, writer, and teacher at Yale School of Drama, who shares her thoughts about creativity, learning, and leading.
Welcome back to the Twice Over podcast. It's really wonderful to have you all here, and we are delighted, just super delighted that today's podcast brings us our guest, Karin Coonrod. She is a director, a writer, the founder of 2 different theater companies. She also teaches at the Yale School of Drama. And this season, we've been talking a lot about leadership, and I got so curious to ask a director about questions of leadership and higher education from the perspective of someone who works in the theater. So, Karin, thank you so much for being willing to talk to us today, and welcome.
Pleasure. Thank you. Great to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your path to becoming a director? Did you always imagine that being the way that you'd participate in theater?
No, I didn't know. I was not in a theater family whatsoever. My mother was Italian and my father American, and I studied literature, but everything that I did as a child was painting, dance, music. I played the piano and the flute. I was thinking about going into piano. And so all these things, and a writer, lots of writing, actually, journalism. And then it wasn't until after college that it all swirled together into visions of directing. And it was in Epidaurus, is I think how you say it in Greek, but Epidaurus, I did teach in a boys' school for a few years. And I was there in Epidaurus, and the theater known as the Theatron, the place of seeing, the scene place. And yet it was the hearing. I was just astonished, and I felt the call to go in. And
you really had a good food, or you really had a revelation, didn't you?
yeah, yes, for sure. It was
Wow.
like, this is it. And I was teaching in this boys' school, teaching English and AP literature and all that. And I was thinking about going into theater. I was directing the musicals and directing the plays there. In fact, when I got the job, he said, would you take over the theater? And without any training, I just said, yes, I'll take it over. And we started doing all kinds of things. Shenandoah, My Fair Lady in a boys' school, Fiddler on the Roof. It was great. And then the last show that I did there was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I set it in the gymnasium because because all boys, and I went to see a couple of basketball games. And I thought that place in the center where those tall boys jump for the ball, I said, I'm going to start the play right there. And that's where the narrator is going to open the play. And we were all seated in stadium seating in the round around that spot so that it would resonate always, not just of basketball, but also of theater.
Wow. So you gave them a new way of thinking about that space, but you also infused the production with all the drama of a jump ball at the opening whistle of a ball game. So
Yeah.
that's a real stroke of genius. That's something that's characterized your career, right? Is changing settings and moving that. Can you talk a little bit about why that interests you and how you get your brainstorms to say, I'm going to do the Merchant of Venice in the Jewish ghetto. I'm going to do this in the basketball court. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I guess it's just taking that idea of the scene place and shifting the angle of the view, and so that we can keep ahead of an audience. The worst thing is the audience is so bored when they're sitting back. I remember George Wolfe used to talk about that. He said, either you lean forward and you're really into it, or you're saying, oh yeah, okay, got it. And we all know what that's like. Oh no. Shifting the angle, shifting the viewing. And for instance, yes, going to Orvieto, Italy, and doing the medieval mystery plays right across the city in an itinerant fashion was really a joy. The plays, who knows exactly? They say they were on carts, they were on whatever, they could be stationary, whatever. But for me, it felt it, and that was in 2004. And that was the start of my second company, Colombari, which is still in existence. We're just celebrated 20 years this year. But 2004, on June 10th, we greeted our audience in the street, and it was free. And they were the English from the English cycles of the medieval mystery plays, but translated into Italian so that they could be greeted for the Italians could. And then we sang all the songs in English or in Latin or in Hebrew. So the songs were not in Italian, but because it was really like Fra Angelico, the iconography of Italy, meeting the pulse of America. So these two, like Fra Angelico and Mahalia Jackson coming together.
That's wonderful. Wow. I wish I could have seen that. That's incredible.
There's some amazing, I mean, it was astonishing. We did it 3 years, and we started in a little street. We then went to the Duomo, this incredible Duomo in Orvieto, where Trezana Beverly one year, she won the Tony Award for Colored Girls in the late 70s. Yeah, and then she played God. People said, Dio Donna. They loved her because she did actually a James Weldon Johnson piece in English. That was in English because I didn't want to translate it. I thought the pulse of that was so strong. And it's from the God's trombones, the creation. And God stepped out on space and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a man. So it was so powerful, so powerful. And from there, we went to a parking lot where we cleared. The most radical thing we did was just clear spaces of cars and just fill them with people. So that's very radical in the old idea of that word, which is it goes to the root of filling the spaces with people rather than other things. And roots being a culture that is full of really work towards radical presence. That's what I'm working on in the theater, especially with all these distractions and all these things going on and all these rumors and lies, and who knows what goes on, what is spoken and that we're not. So greeting our people and moving with them and finding the crowd growing to traverse this whole city little city of Orvieto. It's a very little city, but go to these iconic places and then end at the cliff was just phenomenal. It was just phenomenal. And we threw flower petals over all the audience, little flowers, and it was very special. People had grown and grown, and then everybody was there, all kinds of folks, and we did that 2004, 2005, 2006. We're trying to revisit it in some fashion, and who knows, so many things. Yeah. So in terms of other places like the Jewish ghetto, I was invited into that. And by the time word gets out okay, so she likes Shakespeare and she's half Italian and she works in Italy and she likes outdoor spaces. So how about doing the Merchant of Venice in this conjunction of anniversaries of the 500th anniversary of the founding of the Jewish ghetto, the first ghetto in the whole world, with the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And it was David Castan who wrote to me when I was with a visiting family in Hawaii, and I got this letter in January of 2014, this email. And I said, oh my God, that sounds, yes, that sounds fantastic. And I was I found it's an incendiary play, as we know. And of course, my husband's Jewish, and I call myself Judeo-Christian, but I'm not Jewish. But so the America coming to the ghetto, not Jewish girl. So I had to think this through, how to strategize and make this, because Americans coming to, and that was in 2016. And I thought it all worked out beautifully, but we had 5 Shylocks. I did not want to have a star to have Al Pacino reprise it. He probably wouldn't have had time anyway. But I was not interested in that idea. I was interested in the 5 scenes of Shylock and the 500 years and the 5 books of the Torah and the 555, which I didn't know and think about logically from the get-go, but it was just the 5 scenes. I thought, let's make this Jewish and universal, so that
Wow.
the great victim, the great call for humanity from this person that is being framed in this really greedy culture. It's a super greedy culture, which I think we could say pretty safely about the West and about
Mhm.
that time, Shakespeare's time, the time of the marketplace in Venice, that our country now, my gosh, it never goes away, right? It's founded on that, continues with that, it never stops. Greed and that framing of the play, so that we're not talking about Shakespeare as anti-Semitic, but and in fact, a framing of what he's showing and what the culture is doing to this character in their 5-fold. And they were never there all together. They were in each scene, and then there were 2 times that they were together, once in a howl moment, and then at the very end in a
Wow.
come up
That
and
sounds so powerful. And one of the things that I'm hearing as you describe it, it was so interesting to watch you describe it, because your initial response was yes, absolutely yes. The same as your initial response when you were asked, will you do the high school play for these little boys, right? These young men. So the initial response is yes. And then it's, oh my goodness, this is complex. I need to really be thoughtful about this. I need to talk to some people, and I need to consider all the implications of who I am coming into this particular context at this particular moment with this particular play. And
yeah,
so I love the idea of the initial yes before, right? It's not like I need to think about whether or not I can take this on. It's, this is a challenge. I'm taking it on.
yes,
Shoot, that means I need to think about, right? James Weldon Johnson is an amazing poet. It's not going to be the same in Italian at all, right? There are some things that the power of the rhythm of that African American language that he's writing in
yeah,
is in English. That's the power.
right. That's right. The musicality, that pulse, and having Trezana speak it was just glorious. And somebody, I remember people also said that everyone was very worried. They thought she should have a microphone. And I said, Trezana, do you think you need a mic? And she said, no. I said, please, friends, remember that this place was built in early 1300s, and the Pope didn't have a mic. When he spoke there, he didn't have a mic, and Trezana is an actor, and she did not. It was so powerful. And it was amazing because the facade, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I have a picture I can send you. The facade is so astonishing, but usually people go there and stare at it. And now it was brought to life in this interweaving between the actress and the facade, so that it was brought to life. It was really striking. So
Well,
exciting.
well, I'm not an actor, but I'm a teacher, and we all have that in common. And sometimes I think when I'm teaching, I'm playing this character, this version of myself, Professor
Yeah.
D'Agostino. But at the same time, I want to be authentic in my practice as a teacher. So I'm wondering, as both an actor and a teacher, is there some intersection there that they mutually inform one another? Is there stuff from acting that maybe makes you be a better teacher and stuff from teaching that helps your acting practice?
There's so many things as a teacher that one tests, right? It's like one speaks aloud with, one thinks aloud, I want to say, with great passion, and things tumble out. And so with the acting and the moving, teaching actors and teaching directors to work with actors, it's really all about going inside as far as they can. I always say I want to go in, this is going to sound really funny, weird maybe, but I like those actors that we go inside their heads and swim around. And one could say inside their whole bodies, just go for that. But we go inside them, and because we want to be, it's like, oh, I'm, I want to know how you're thinking. And those are the smart actors. Those are the really, you're just riveted when they have secrets that they're not sharing everything. They're not sharing everything. There's so much more in there, but they're speaking and they're not emoting. It's not. So it's like that is what I find the most compelling. So yeah, I suppose theater, it's performance. And as teachers, we perform and we have a confidence in that. It's a very deep gift, right? It's a gift to be able to speak and with people, connecting with people, and to try to bring out everything that are secrets inside. I don't know, that are lasting. That I do think that the theater is something that is ephemeral, but it's also eternal. And I think that when one has done all one's preparation for the encounter with an audience, that I think an eternal chord is struck. And that those two E's, ephemeral, yes, it all goes away. Did this happen? Did that play happen in the basketball court?
Is this part of like your desire to take theater out of the theater and move it into inhabited spaces, like where people
Yeah.
aren't expecting theater? So I guess what I'm thinking is like the passive to the active that you were modeling before about your audience leaning forward. I couldn't help but think of my students like that, right? I want them to lean forward and not
Yeah.
consume the class as that they're just watching it, but to actively engage. I'm wondering if I should just take my lecture notes and stand in the public square and just give my lecture and see how that goes. Yes, a
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think shaking things up is a good thing. And Socrates did that, didn't he? I think shaking things up is really great. And I love the theater and I love being outside the theater. I think any space is a theater and any place is a place to teach. Any place is a place for spectacle. And it is, we took our Walt Whitman piece, for instance, all around various places in New York for free. So it was More or Less I Am, and we did it, for instance, yes, at Joe's Pub, but we also did it at Grant's Tomb, and we did it at Barge Music in Brooklyn, and we did it in the Wadley School up in Harlem, and we did it at the World Trade Center, where those steps, all the audience sat on steps and the performers were in that little platform with more steps going down. They were there. We've done it in so many places. And I just think, and people can be affected and have a life changed, or as long as we come to it prepared and then throwing it all out the window and saying, okay, I'm ready. I've got everything I need. I'm ready. But when I think about another little book that I really love, which I always have my students read in the beginning of Shakespeare, is The Architecture of Time. It's the prologue of Abraham Joshua Heschel in his little tiny book called The Sabbath. And Heschel was he was the rabbi that walked with Martin Luther King across the bridge. And remarkable man. And I started reading him when I was 19 in theology classes and so forth, and was just smitten by the poetic theology. But in this Architecture of Time, he talks about how we occupy space, but we share time. And just for a minute, I think it's important to privilege time over space. Of course, space, in the theater, we need space and time, but the time is very festive. And he goes on to talk about Sabbath and how that time is a time of rest and a festive time. And it's very beautiful. But I think theater is also like that. Theater is, we've prepped, and then it's like, what is going to happen? And that's what I'm looking for, radical presence of being totally prepared by the actors having worked very hard, but also honoring each other and knowing each other so well. This really, I have to say that we just did King Lear at La Mama in July, and we're going to do it again next year in January 26. And I was so thrilled with it. It was 10 people playing Lear at the top of the play. Know that we have divided in three our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent. So And they're all wearing very tall paper crowns. The design was all inspired by Anselm Kiefer and costume designers Juana Botez. And it was very special. Preparing this for years and years. Actually, the first time I did it was at Fordham. I did it at Fordham in
Wow.
2000. Yes, when Gore lost. I'll never
Ah,
forget. Soraya and it was 10 actors. It's the first time I did it at Fordham in that space. You go in in the Lincoln Center and you turn right and there's that gymnasium or whatever with a stage at the end.
yep.
And I had amazing designers. I had Ricardo Hernandez who did the set. He's now doing everything on Broadway and everything. And I think Chad, who still teaches there, I think, was the lighting designer. PK Wish did the costumes. But anyway, it was very special. These 10 kids, 10 undergrads. And we did a special piece of work. It was really remarkable. I always thank them in all the programs. I think the Fordham kids, that's when we first did it. And then I did it ART with those kids. And then I started doing little workshops and readings and developing it. And now we've got it. Now we're doing it. And we did it with, I don't know if you know these names, but Michael Potts and Tom Nellis and Tony Torn and Joe May. Anyway, a whole bunch of people at both spectrums, like very seasoned actors and new on the block.
That's so thrilling.
Yeah.
I have so many different questions that are sprouting off of what you've just shared, but let me just ask you one at a time.
Okay.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to a theater director is that we're thinking about leadership. And teachers are leaders in a way, right? We're in charge of our classroom. And
Yeah.
as a director, my hypothesis is that perhaps you have special challenges in leadership because the people that you're working with are creative and they all come with you to you with very distinct ideas about how to do it. And I imagine that there's a little more pressure that you experience from your actors about, I had this idea, Karin, and excuse me, but my vision for my part, my vision for myself is this. And so I'm wondering if my hypothesis bears any water. And if it does, how do you think about leading other people who are also creative?
Yeah. Okay. A couple of things come to mind because true, there are places so there's a vision. I'm visionary, definitely. People know that about me. I have a very strong vision. I bring that into the room. I do lots and lots of work on the piece by myself first, and then start talking with the creative team and dreaming and thinking about things. And what about sitting in the space if we're going to be in a particular space and just dreaming there and imagining stuff, going to make sketches. If like in the Jewish ghetto, I sat and sketched and imagined the use of the roof and the balcony, the windows, as well as the space, because we played right on the stones. And sometimes the vision is strong, and so people get excited about it. People get excited. So that's one thing. And then if sometimes there's an idea that I hadn't thought about, and the vision can encompass that, because it's like, yeah, that's great. That's marvelous. Yes, indeed. Yes. And it is, I know I've had a lot of talks with John Conklin, my very close friend who is known for making the set designs at the Metropolitan and Glimmerglass and different places. But we always think about what the project wants to be, and not imposing on the project, but what the project is. Because there's this moment, the vision, and then it's, oh, that's where it's going. That's what it wants to be.
Right.
And my collaborators, of course, are all people that I very close to. And there are new people. Like I had a wonderful lighting designer that I worked with King Lear, and I was very interested. He was a poet, artist, wonderful, could feel a space, and was only frustrated by lack of equipment sometimes. And of course, those things upset us. But then, okay, what's the next step? What do we do? How do we make it? How do we make it despite that? And because there's always a way, there's always something. And that was so wonderful to work with him, because I have worked with some fabulous lighting designers, and composers too. Frank London, my goodness, who in a fury when he was also wrestling with his own mortality. He's okay, he's doing okay, but it's always going to be this thing that's with him. I just saw him last evening, but he did the music for King Lear, and in a fury, and we worked really in shorthand almost about the movements and so forth. Anyway, so yes, there's listening to what the thing wants to be from the collaborators. And then also sometimes I notice when, like, so actors are usually really jazzed. I was so thrilled by King Lear. Every single one of those actors was so confident in, and I love that. I love working with people that are deeply confident. And so we had a great time. And I didn't have to build up anyone's, I didn't have to go overboard. There are these
Right,
things.
not a lot of pep talks and, oh, honey, you can do it, you're fine.
There's a lot of that sometimes. And there are other ways that the thing comes out and you realize, oh my God, I was just so blessed with King Lear, beyond blessed. But I noticed that sometimes we need to communicate very clearly, because misunderstandings can happen, because I assume maybe that you understand something. And so the task to be crystal clear in the way that is engaging and entertaining and not impatient, because I can feel these little things in me sometimes. And so it's like just being clear sometimes for people, especially when they don't know me or don't know all the things I've been through and gone through in terms of the vision or whatever it is.
So when I'm listening to you talk about leadership, and it's really interesting because you say we a lot, right? You don't really say I did this and I did that. It's
No.
always we. And praise and acknowledge the people that you worked with, right? Even
Yeah.
so far as giving us their names, right? There was this person and this person.
Yeah.
So as a leader in your work, do you have a theory of leadership? Imagine you're on a podcast about leadership and people interested in leadership were listening to you. What would you say to leaders, current and future? What is some advice that you might give based on your experience?
Yeah, I would say humility and confidence. So I would say truly, truly, humility is important. It's to be on the earth and to remember that we are all human, and what is to be worshipped is what is larger than all of us, not each other we honor. And we should just, as the scriptures say, actually outdo each other in giving honor to each other and calling each other. But I would say humility is really very important. And I sometimes see, and that can excise the anger. There's a lot of anger these days. It's really, sometimes I'm very sensitive to it. It's a lot out there.
There's a lot of anger. It's a lot of anger. And it's interesting that you talk about humility and confidence and balancing those things. I don't have a question, but I want to hear you talk more about excising the anger. I think that phrase is so beautiful. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by creating that atmosphere that it's almost like defusing a bomb?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because there are people walking around with lots of it, and it's hard. And recognizing it, we all have anger. We all have anger, and we have to learn to harness it. The harnessing of the anger so that there's energy, that we don't waste time. But okay, I'm going to put my anger about injustice or about being misunderstood or about these things, and put it into, there's no time to waste. And God knows I've wasted a lot of time with these things too, with lamenting and that sort of thing, and looping and that sort of thing. But just saying, no, now look what look where we are in this situation right now. We started talking about this, doing this interview before the election. Now it's after the election. And of course, we live in a city where everyone opines openly, endlessly, and just another thing I would say is humor. And again, humor, humility, humor. There's a sense of humor that's needed. And I find that lacking sometimes. I find it's like laughing at oneself, laughing at being able to open up to find the laughter of joy.
The theater is so beautiful for that, because I think about anger. There's plenty of anger in Lear, and there's a lot of impotent rage and a lot of misdirected rage and a lot of pretty powerful rage. The rage of Goneril and Regan has real effect on the outcomes for that kingdom and Cordelia's life, but displacing the anger that we feel in our current situation by going to theater and having that catharsis of watching it unfold again for us and saying, Goneril and Regan don't come out on top in this story, and maybe we should rethink our acting just on impulse.
Yeah, I think with Lear, yes, with Lear, it's such a deep, I believe that play was sculpted out of silence and then goes back to the ineffable, back to silence. So it's like these words that are contained and surrounded by silence. When the mystery of that begins to be penetrated, then we start to catch the words and we start to see the grief. And without going endlessly into therapeutic discussions but seeing the three sisters, the oldest, the middle, and the youngest, there's pretty much a psychology that fits right across the board, right across time, right into now. Who's the oldest, who's the youngest, who's the middle, blah, 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 and what goes on there and the competitions.
Yes, as the middle child in my family, I found myself lacking in sympathy for Cordelia, I have to say.
That's right. That's right. It's like Cordelia, no.
Again
Yes.
with the Cordelia, enough already with Cordelia, please.
Yeah. She says what's so funny is that I really tapped into, I feel the measurement of love at the beginning of that play is so false. That is not what you do. That is a bad question, Lear. That is a bad question.
So I know we're running out of time, but I'm wondering if there is an actor or maybe a performance even that you would recommend to someone who really wanted to see something special, maybe in a film, so it's accessible to our audience.
Gosh,
There's a lot of them, I imagine.
There's so many people. Something that just comes to mind which is actually just a kind of a recitation, but Judi Dench in The Owl and the Pussycat. And it is unbelievable. It's very short. She's just unbelievable. She takes my breath away. Anything she's in just kills me. She's
the best. She's the best. And you made my day, because one of our most faithful listeners is my mom, and one of my mom's very favorite people in the world is Judi Dench. And this is going to make the final cut for sure. That's fantastic. And The Owl and the Pussycat. Oh, Edward Lear is hilarious.
You have to see that. It's very short. It's unbelievable. She's just being interviewed or something, and then she starts in.
That's what I've noticed when I see her being interviewed, and someone will say something about poetry or Shakespeare to her, and it's you flip a switch.
Yeah.
And she has access to her performance self.
Yes.
And it's right there. And
yeah.
I don't even know how you live that close. You think about people who are like, I need to prepare, and they turn their back and they shake their hair and they have to go into some zone. And she just it's instantaneous with her. It really does feel like a miracle when you watch. I feel like I've learned a ton, and we're coming to the end of our time, but always the last question that we ask is not really a question, but an invitation for you to tell us about a teacher that's mattered to you. So that's my invitation to you. So would you share with us the story of a teacher that's been important in your life?
Sure. My teacher mentor was Liviu Chule, who taught for 1 year, I think it was, only at Columbia when I went there after I was in the boys' school, I went to Columbia to study directing and got the MFA. And my second year, he walked into the classroom and it was like, oh, wow. He started talking. He reminded me a little bit of my grandfather. He's Romanian. My grandfather was Italian, my maternal grandparents and so forth. So there's something, and we connected. He saw the poetry inside of me and he told that to me and he asked me to assist him. So I assisted him on the Bacchae at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis for 9 weeks. It was amazing. And he was teaching me Romanian and I was just learning so much from him. And I wrote everything down. And then I would go home and have dinner with him and with Helga, his wife, every night. I was almost like their daughter or something. It was just, we were always together and I sat by his side and he would turn to me and say some funny things and then go back. And I feel like I brought this younger energy too, because he had the chorus. And at one point he did something which it was like, yes. And I was rocking. I said, yeah, and he said, so you would do something like this, wouldn't you? And I said, yes. He was so elegant. He died in 2011 when I was doing Love's Labor's Lost at the Public Theater. And I remember his passing, and the older ones in the crowd, in the company, knew him, like Reggie Cathy and Francis Jew and Stephen Skybell. They all knew. But he was very special to me and recognized and pulled it out and always saw that. And so we connected. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And how wonderful to be seen by someone for whom you have so much respect and feel
Yes.
such a connection. That's a great gift, to have an amazing teacher and to have that teacher think that you're great. And
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
It was such a gift. And I visited him in Bucharest, and I actually directed in Romania, but in the Hungarian section of Romania, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, very special human being.
Karin, it's been just absolutely a delight and a treat. And I asked my colleague, George Strantz, whom should we invite on the podcast? And he gave me one name and he said, I just know that you're going to love Karin Coonrod. And I do. And so call me a convert. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is really lovely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was lovely having you.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you too.
Twice Over Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify. New episodes update intermittently. We aim for once a week, but sometimes we just can't get it done. You can also find us on our blog, twiceoverpodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening.